Yo, so today I want to talk about something that I think is quite important, and I think it's the concept that revolves around the test of demand, right? Um, I don't see it being talked about much, so I think it is quite important. But anyway, so essentially, I think as you, I think as you go on through your journey, you learn to optimize for expectancy because this is solely what everything revolves around as a trader. And essentially, when you arrive at this conclusion, you have two options, right? You can either optimize for relative return or win rate because the formula for expectancy effectively just relies on your average win rate and how much your average relative return is, right? And so you can learn, hey, I can increase my average win rate or I can increase my average return, right? And consequently decreasing these, right? To get better expectancy because that's all that matters in this game, right? And you'll see that new traders really tend to focus on optimizing their relative return, right? Maybe they don't even realize that they're doing that, but you'll see very often um, new traders that work on tightening their stops like significantly, right? So maybe this is where they want to trade, and I can just zoom in a bit here. So maybe the entry's here, right? And this is the trade setup as a 40% win rate. But instead, what they do, they try to asymmetricize the fuck out of the relative return, and you get stopped, right? And I think as you gain more experience, you learn that the true variable that you want to learn to optimize and manipulate is for your win rate because it's much more manageable, right? And you can't control the returns that you make in a market, but you can control your risk and the setups that you take. And so there are mainly like two ways to actually increase your win rate, right? Obviously, we can use the same example, right? Well, let's just use this example, right? It's just a random setup. You take this setup, maybe it has a 40% win rate and 2.5 relative return, right? Bang. And now it has an 80% win rate. But this is not isolated, right? The change that you're implementing to this trade is affecting your relative return, right? Again, coming back to this. So what you want to do is try and increase your win rate without it having any impact on your relative return. Now, how would you do that? The best thing that I come up with, or the best thing that I've learned, is being able to refine your setups. And all that is doing is you're choosing objectively high probability trade setups to take, right? And let's say you have 100 trades. Maybe your return, or the majority of your return, let's say 70% of the return you make from 100 setups only comes from 20 of them. So how do you refine your setups further, right? There are many ways you can do this: building screeners, adding more indicators, choosing specific market context, environment, etc. One of the things that really helps, at least helped me, was um, execution based. Right, this is more about execution based edge, right? The test of demand. Um, and I think the best way to talk about this is to give an example, right? So we'll just throw all these up here. We'll just keep this here because it's kind of important. So anyway, let's first talk about an uptrend. So this is an uptrend, right? And to talk about the anatomy of an uptrend, it's just aggressive buying, overwhelming passive selling, right? All that means is that here there is passive selling. Let's make this red, right? And there is strong amounts of buying. Where is the arrow up, right? And it's overwhelming it. This is overwhelming it, so it pushes it up, and that's what keeps on happening, right? Simultaneously, there's a lot of offside positioning. I don't want to talk about this too much because it's all relatively simple, right? Here, low gets broken, offside positioning, selling, and then this is maybe short entering, then price grinds away from them, and then they're forced to puke, shoots price higher, and then here again, people are like, oh, it's going to break down, they short it, and they get squeezed out, right? That's generally what happens. One way to understand structure is just keeping in mind pivots, right? You can see here just lows are consistently being held, right? Someone's pushing this up and someone's defending, right? They work in tandem, right? Someone is pushing price up, someone is defending lows, right? So now, conversely, when is it not an uptrend? I guess a better question to ask is, when does an uptrend end? When this stops fucking happening, right? It's as simple as that. So you don't want to be shorting. As long as this is happening, you never want to be shorting. Why? Because it's still an uptrend. So a top forms, right? Let's just say here, top forms when it stops uptrending. Simple, right? So again, using what we've kind of explained very briefly, when does that come in? It's when lows start being lost, right? Uh when someone is pushing price up or someone is defending lows, right? That's an uptrend. So when it stops happening, essentially, and when does that stop happening? At least here in the example, you can see all this is just grindy ass lows. Here you have some like fucked PA. I guess this was news driven, so we can kind of ignore that. But again, a lot of grinding, sideways grinding. But when did lows actually start being lost? it's quite simply here, right? Because you can see if we just zoom in, right, you can see we maintain this kind of like we break up and then we can start to consolidate sideways. We start to make internally bullish structure, right? Uh, right, and then what happens here? Whether you want to use this low, but we break a low here, and then what happens? We start to downtrend, right? So this is what you can call like a sign of exhaustion, right? Sign of exhaustion. Um, and we're gonna just say that this is from a PA file, from PA POV, because realistically, right, exhaustion is used not even synonymously, but it's used in so many it's for so many different definitions, right? Whether you're looking at RSI, you'll see that there'll be divergence here, right, between these two highs, or maybe like between these ones. Here, RSI traders will be saying here, this is exhaustion or bearish divergence. When that's exhaustion, flow will be different, but we're not going to talk about flow. Essentially, this is a sign of exhaustion from the PA perspective, right? You lose a low, and price there it's trending down, right? But because this is very internal relative to this external trend that we're talking about, right? What you want to see is you can say that okay, price is definitely slowing down here, right? What's happening is okay, so what you can see, so when you observe exhaustion, right, that doesn't mean just ape a trade, right? Something that I see very often is that people see a sign of weakness and then just ape it, right? And that's what catches you off guard. You might be aping the low here, right? Which is getting you caught off guard. Maybe like this is breaking down, it's doing a very similar thing. Let's go. And that's how you get wrecked essentially, right? So the key principle, coming back to the whole principle of refining your setups or having the patience, right, to wait for what you want to see. So essentially here, right, you're seeing what? You're seeing, okay, aggressive buying is no longer overwhelming passive sellers, right? They're just not managing to create new highs, right? And the sellers are just getting stronger. Lows are being lost, right? From where lows are being defended, right? Now lows are being lost. Okay, aggressive sellers are now in control. So what you want to see is a strong sign that, hey, if there's a large amount of buying, that sellers are really like defending this strongly, right? Because that's what matters to you. It's like a game of tug of war, right? If I can try and explain this, let's see. So essentially, right, tug of war, if you don't know what that is, it's when two people are basically pulling on a rope and whoever pulls it first wins. Or like whoever pulls it to one side, so he's trying to pull it here, he's trying to pull it here, right? So essentially, let's say person one, we can just do A and B, right? So let's say at time one, right, person A starts pulling, and person B is just he's not trying to like pull it to the left hand side, he's just trying to keep it straight. A's trying to pull it here, and B's just trying to hold it, right? And then this keeps on happening. He's not managing to pull it, and then at time two, A is now tired, right? So he's just tired, and because B hasn't been exerting all his, I guess, effort, he has now an opportunity to pull it this way while A is tired. And at that point, that's the most likely way that he would win, right? Because if they're both pulling, it's just kind of an inefficient expenditure of energy. Whereas if he tries to save some energy by merely just holding onto it and waiting for him to get tired, it's a bit more like fucking 300 IQ play. You know what I mean? So essentially, that's the same principle, right? And let's say that, okay, he might be pulling, he's not pulling, right? He's just holding still. He gets tired, and then you're not going to bet on B to win this if he continues to stay still, right? You need to see evidence that he is pulling left while he is tired, and then you would bet on B. Yeah, so that's what the whole principle revolves around when you're viewing this. So here you can essentially say, okay, buyers are definitely exhausted here, but what you want to see is evidence that sellers are willing to defend and also drive price down, right? Because what happens in prior situations where you see, okay, here, okay, buyers are definitely exhausted, they're weak, but here sellers didn't really take advantage of anything, right? They couldn't push price down lower, nor they had any like strong chance to prove their, I guess, defense. Let's say here, this swept, there was a lot of aggressive passive selling here that absorbed a lot of buying. You saw price come down, something similar here, and then kept breaking lows. This is when you're like, okay, yeah, sellers are definitely winning. I'm willing to bet on them, right? So you're seeing that as PA goes on, or as time goes on, and you get more PA, you have more opportunity to position yourself with a higher win rate, right? As you're getting more information, more data, you have more proof or evidence of what to go on for. And also, it also means because especially when I was starting off, I want to be really tight, and so you start aping setups with the whole premise of keeping a very tight stop. And what can happen is you can be right on the idea, let's say here, but because you see the initial weakness, and then you like just try to constantly chase weakness instead of like so. I guess one way to say this is, I want to be aping strength at resistance following proven weakness and not aping weakness at support, right? Because weakness at support is often bait. Because how often does price look like shit at our bottom? Often, right? It looks like shit here. If we go back to here, imagine you're just looking at this. It looks like it's falling off a cliff, right? But it's not. And so you want to be waiting for these, I guess, you know, these tests of demand. And depending on how you want to trade it, that's a completely different topic. If you're someone like me who takes advantage of gaps, then shit like this is always going to be very easy to trade and very tight, where you get sweeps into gaps consistently, right? Anyway, okay, so following on it, right? I've explained this a few times in one of the groups I'm in, and I think this guy here, like, shout out him because I'm kind of retarded with words and shit, right? But essentially, the premise falls back that any ground that was gained is meaningless unless you can prove you can defend it, right? So what that means is, for example, this is one of the trades I took recently, right? This was a level of mine, right? For whatever reason, doesn't matter. But I don't want to see price just hit this level, right? I want to see proof that there is willing. I want to see proof first, right? That sellers are exhausted, right? Two, that there's willing buyers defending, right? Again, looking back at the same principle of the two people, right? A and B, one side is tired, and during this time, is this side willing to pull or are they going to be stationary? If they're willing to pull, I'm willing to bet on this team because they're taking advantage of when this side is tired, right? X is obviously denoting like them being tired or exhausted, and this is stationary, this is them pulling, right? So if I go into replay tool, start. Okay, so this is the principle I was talking about before, right? The importance of waiting for a test of demand. Because if you had aped anywhere in here, you're essentially just following a V reverse, like a V reversal, right? Which is so much more unlikely to happen than an actual bottoming process, right? A bottoming process is either going to be something like a one-sided move followed by a sweep, or it's going to be a bit more of a range, right? And then it's going to take out some internal low, right? These are the two main bottoming patterns that happen now, right? In previous years, when like SBF or Hayes were huge players in the market, you would see this a lot more often, right? So like before 2023, it was all about this, right? Every low was essentially like this, right? Now it's a bit more fugazi. You get this kind of internal sweep where it leaves all the pivots beside one. It's a lot more common. Another way of kind of saying it is this like kind of rounded bottom, which is essentially this whole thing. Anyway, so you can see here, right? You have a very one-sided flow. I think a lot of this comes down to experience and just understanding again flows, right? You have a very inefficient move here. What does that mean? It's just a very one-sided flow. So what does price do? It just kind of retraces some of it, fills in some of the inefficiency. But how does it do it? It moves in a straight line. How often does price move in a straight line? Not often. So is it worth aping anywhere here? Is it worth FOMOing? Let's see. This is a great level for you, yeah. Either you take a very aggressive entry, right, on the first sign of strength, but you're not going to be aping up here with a stop down here, targeting wherever the fuck, 100k, right? Because you haven't seen any proof that okay buyers are willing to defend. All you're seeing is one-sided flows, and what I can tell you is that maybe it's just these shorts that shorted up here, right? They sold and now they're just T-wapping out, they're just covering, right? And what happens then? Well, there's no actual true demand, and so price just keeps gravitating lower, right? And so essentially what you want to see. So remember, right? Previously I was talking about this was a trade I took. This was an important level. I think I don't know where the level came in. I was waiting to see for exhaustion, right? So what's the sign of exhaustion? So price has been pretty aggressive down. It's trending down. What happens here is you can see some like compression that starts occurring, right? Very clear. Well, what does this mean? I mean, clearly sellers are failing to drive it lower, right? They can't drive it lower anymore compared to like these larger rotations where price is a lot more aggressive, right? And then what happens is you can see a final kind of like bottom. So they really tried to pass it down, and you get price breaking back above the origin of the impulse down, right? Again, I hate like having to explain a lot of these patterns, but this is essentially what you should all memorize, right? This is what's happening here. It's seeing strength versus non-strength, right? This is not strength, this is strength. The origin of the selling is all you need to pay attention to. What is happening here? Is it above or below? Is it dying, right? Maybe you can find an example. I'm blind as fuck. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, this is no real like, liquidation move here. This one, maybe you can say, hey, this didn't retrace this. But anyway, you'll see it very often if you just use your eyes and shit. You know, even here, maybe you can say this is a strong move. Origin couldn't break it, so it continues all right. But anyway, yeah. Okay, so to summarize, right, trading is all about expectancy, and the two main things that you can focus on are optimizing relative return and win rate. To increase win rate, the best thing you can do is refine yourself. So one of the ways you can do that is by honing in on your execution-based edge, right? And the biggest thing regarding that is patience in general. And as time goes on, you gain more data, which means you can have a better or a more accurate perception of the probabilistic outcome of the PA they are reading, right? Or the flows that you're reading, right? The more data, the better your fucking reading is going to be, right? You have this here. It's a lot easier to tell what's going to happen at this point here than at this point here, right? More info, clearer reading. Um, one of the best ways to do this, for me at least, is waiting always for this test of demand. It's basically, this is like max evidence, right? Before the breakdown, this is the max amount of evidence you've had. You've had like, okay, sellers are really selling, they're chilling out, and then you get proof, okay, now buyers are fucking flipping the switch and this price is gonna go up, right? And this is a big one as well. Aping strength at resistance following proven weakness, not aping weakness at support, right? Or you can just understand this in a better way. Or like as I said with the like two people playing tug of war, right? You can think about it from this analogy as well. You can bet on the guy with just a spear or sword, right? Who's just being aggressive, right? Say price went down and it's just being aggressive, right? But you're better off waiting for the side that can also prove that they're defending to go up, right? This is gonna be a lot better of a trade than aping up here. Just aping strength, right? You want to wait for this proof of defense, right? At top, you want to see aggressive buyers exhaust. Again, seeing exhaustion. You want to see sellers overwhelm passive buyers, right? So essentially, seeing aggressive buyers exhaust, what that means is that they're stopping to make new highs, right? And then aggressive sellers overwhelming passive buyers, right? Lows stop being defended. Now lows are being lost, right? Lows are being lost. Willing sellers defend. You're seeing again these highs not making newer highs, right? Until there is an attempt, but this fails to really do anything, and it quickly gets reverted. And it's the same principle for a bottom. V reverse here. Oh, I didn't really draw it, but here a V reverse when it's just unidirectional flow is just exhaustion from sellers and buyers overwhelming passive sellers, right? You're only seeing one type of flow. You haven't seen buyers defend, right? Which is what you want to see here. And without buyers willing to defend, price just goes back down. And I think it was Hustling who said like, uh, the quicker the quicker the move up, right, and there has been less time to prove significant demand, the fucking easier it is to snap back down as well, right? Okay, yeah. So last thing is, as you can see here, there's a tweet from Hustling, right, Goat guy. It's essentially the premise that when you have a move down and then a reversal up that's swift or I guess quick, whatever, right? Essentially, what I'm talking about a V reverse here, the move down will be equally as swift because you've had no time of buyers defending. There's no evidence of true demand, I guess, in his words, right? Um, because there's a lack of supply here. There's going to be a lack of demand on the way down, and this is essentially what I consider to be one-sided flows. The same, and it's the exact same way that I'm saying. We have a move up, right, and this is an aggressive move. You have very strong sellers, right, and over here they've been doing a lot of like defending highs, right? They've been defending highs up here, and they've been aggressively selling, defending. What happens here? They get a move, whether it's a lick cascade or just a stop loss run, whatever it is, right? Here, they're no longer defending these highs, right? Because they profited, so now they're just exiting their position, right? Until they're like, hey, you know what? We can step in again. We're gonna start defending highs. And what was perceived as demand here, but there was no test of it. Prices fucking traverses all the way back down. Anyway, this might be a very complicated fucking video because I am retarded, but we will see if it makes sense.